Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and, I've got live pictures in front of me. Dominic Cummings, remember him, and Lee Kane, who was sort of his senior henchman, are due to give evidence to the COVID-19 inquiry today. I confessed to you yesterday, probably rather amateurishly. Do you think I overshare? Do I overshare with you? Do you think I tell you stuff I probably shouldn't? I regret stuff. I've got some fascinating gossip about one of my stand-ins from last week, but I can tell by my colleagues' reactions that if I share that with you on air, the heads will roll, probably. Heads will roll. Can I not even play a guessing game with it? I mean, it's great. No? Okay. God, such killjoys. Seriously. You wouldn't think I was the oldest person on the team, would you? But I think I overshared yesterday when I said I was struggling to come up with a good question about the COVID-19 inquiry. But I am, and I was, and I still am, but I want to talk about it first up this morning. And I think we can find a way into it together through some of the details that emerged yesterday. Chiefly, I think, two things really spring to mind. The first is that Chris Whitty described Rishi Sunak's Eat Out to Help Out scheme as Eat Out to Help the virus. I think you have to work on the principle, don't you, that they didn't expect any of this ever to come out. You just have to work on that principle. I find that a bit baffling. I know that a fish rots from the head down, at least that's the proverb. I don't think it's anatomically correct. But the idea that Boris Johnson's moral corruption and general uselessness was so overpowering, so complete, that it actually ended up affecting every single tentacle of government is pretty hard to resist. How could you have sat there as Chancellor of the Exchequer and thought to yourself, well, the Chief Medical Officer thinks that this is an absolutely ridiculous idea that is almost certainly going to kill people, but I'm going to get some good front pages out of it. So let's press ahead. You could only have done that if you thought it was going to stay secret. Listen, I could be getting all of this wrong. And you know what happens when I get everything wrong. You ring me up and tell me that I've got everything wrong. And I very modestly and humbly accept your criticism, change course accordingly, and we all press on together. But I don't think I am. I cannot see how 90% of the stuff that's already come out, and we'll get on to the worst bit of all in just a moment, I don't see how I don't see how this could have happened unless almost everybody involved thought that this was never going to emerge. Chiefly, of course, on the WhatsApp messages, but not exclusively on the WhatsApp messages. Also on the notes, the contemporaneous notes, the minutes. The worst of which, well, I'll let you listen to it. These are notes made by the Prime Minister's private secretary for public services, a chap called Imran Shafi, giving evidence to the COVID-19 inquiry yesterday. And this, for my money, well, actually, do you remember, and I'm not making light of anything here, but do you remember when we spotted some... Because what's really got my goat this morning is people saying they're surprised. So I want to remind you of something that we did at the time. And we did it quite a lot. And we did it carefully and sensitively because it is comical. It is a reference to a joke at a time of tragedy. But that is when you trust me to walk the tightrope of sensitivity. And I did. Because every single time we looked closely at what Boris Johnson was doing, we were reminded of a character from Shrek.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Now that's funny, right? That's funny because it is a portrait of utter, arrogant, entitled callousness. It's funny. It's quality comedy because it portrays so perfectly and so satirically the idea of a leader so utterly contemptuous of the lives of the people that he leads that he considers their deaths to be a small inconvenience. And his arrogance is such that he would, with a straight face, say, that is a risk that I am prepared to take. Now, I hope you were listening at the time, because you'll know we played that a lot. We possibly played it a little bit too much. It may indeed have been one of those clips where Keith communicated to me through the power of interpretive dance that he felt we were perhaps playing it a little bit too often, hitting it, you might say, a little bit too hard. And then yesterday, pops the Prime Minister's private secretary for public services, and he says this.
Could we have 146636, please? This is your diary, your notebook, page 92. Halfway down the page, we can see CX bilat. Is that a reference to a bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
It is, yes.
In quotes, we're killing the patient to tackle the tumour. Large PPL, numbers of people who will die. Why are we destroying everything for people who will die anyway soon?
I think that says economy.
Destroy the economy for people who will die anyway soon. Mr. Shaffi, who said those words?
I can't say for sure. I think it was the former Prime Minister.
And people in hospital, the elderly or the infirm or the ill, were described as bed blockers.
I think that was a term that was also widely used in DHSC and the NHS of people who didn't need to be in hospital.
Well, how do you process that? How do you process the knowledge that the two most powerful men in the country were sitting together in a room, complaining that we were going to prioritise the lives of our loved ones, or complaining about the very idea of prioritising the lives of human beings over the economy? Now, there's always some balance, but just have a look at what every other country in the world did. Have a look at whether any other governments have been revealed to have treated the idea, to have treated humanity with contempt and money with an almost fetishistic reverence. It's incredible. In fact, listening to that now, it rather knocks into a cocked hat the Chris Whitty, Rishi Sunak thing, because although Eat Out to Help Out was obviously disastrous, it wasn't immediately obviously disastrous. It took the following week's figures to come through. I don't know if you remember. We were quite warm about it because we were just so desperate to get out of the house, weren't we? You remember? We're just so desperate to get out of the house. And so the man who came along and gave us a free pass and half a free dinner, he was public hero number one for a week, and then the numbers came out of new infections, and you just sort of went, it was almost a sense of guilt and shame at how stupid you'd been the previous week when you were carrying him around the room on your shoulders. But that's nothing compared to what we just heard, is it? Some of you may die, but that is a risk I am willing to take. He might as well have said it. He might as well have done the voice. And he was saying it in the heart of government. He was saying it in a meeting, a one-on-one, a bilateral meeting with this Shaffi fella taking notes, a bilateral meeting between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And of course, that desire to do nothing, that desire to let it run through the population like a dose of salts, explains the dithering and the delay that other testimonies have described. You've even got Lord Bethel, who is a largely ridiculous character. He's the fella that once tweeted about how he's the third Baron Bethel, and he went to Harrow, and he once tweeted that people who got bad A-level results shouldn't worry because it's when he learnt to hustle. He got bad A-level results, he learnt to hustle, and then lo and behold, he's ended up a hereditary peer in the House of Lords. So therein lies the power of hustle. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and he's given an interview this morning in which he describes Boris Johnson as just being utterly detached, utterly uninterested, utterly removed. There were rumours at the time that he was too busy working on his Winston Churchill biography or looking after his fiancée. Dominic Cummings has spoken about the distractions caused by a new dog arriving in Downing Street and Boris Johnson's fiancée being cross about some press coverage regarding the dog. We may hear more of that today. But there are no words for this. Another, exchange between the cabinet secretary, a man who was over-promoted into that position so that he wouldn't stand up to the absurdity and depravity of Boris Johnson, describing Boris Johnson in an exchange with Dominic Cummings as being just a disaster. I'm at the end of my tether, wrote Simon Case. He changes strategic direction every day. Monday, we were all about fear of virus returning as per Europe. Today, we're all let it rip mode because the UK is pathetic and needs a cold shower. What did you think was going to happen when you put this man in charge? What did you think was going to happen? I remember I banged my head against so many brick walls from the BBC to LBC, just saying to people, if you let these liars get away with it now, what is going to come next? If you let the lies of Brexit go unchallenged, you sweep it under the carpet, everybody's moved on, you lost, get over it. If you let these liars get away with it and then take over, which was pretty clearly going to happen, if the lies were left unchallenged, then you're going to end up with these chancers, cheats and charlatans in the very heart of government, with the possibility that something catastrophic will then happen. The possibility, no certainty. Economic problems, okay, that's fine. He'll have people around him who can deal with that. But a global pandemic and him in charge, what did you think was going to happen? And even I find myself reeling today from the news that everybody around him knew how awful he was. These exchanges between the cabinet secretary and his chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, they could have been my monologues back in the middle of it. They could have been my monologue. The way I talked about Boris Johnson, his closest colleagues were talking about him in exactly the same way. And then what happened when you turned on your radio or opened your Daily Mail or your Daily Telegraph? Oh, he's fantastic. He's getting all the big calls right. Captain Hindsight Starmer something, Curry something, down with whatever. It's absolutely bonkers. And he didn't even care about the economy, did he, really? He just didn't want to be responsible for giving people bad news. Some of you may die, but that is a risk I am prepared to take. Following the science. The scientists were saying, don't do it. Literally, we're following the science. We've got all the... Think about Dorries and Rees-Mogg. I often come back to them because they're just like the poster boy and the poster girl of absolutely unforgivable awfulness. They're marching around still claiming that he was more sinned against than sinning. They must have known what his closest colleagues were saying about him. And on it went. I honestly can't quite believe the clarity and the certainty with which his closest colleagues described his awfulness, when those of us who were pointing it out at the time were so bloody lonely. And I don't mean me, I mean you. I mean anybody who was properly paying attention and hadn't been somehow blinded or intoxicated by Boris Johnson's Variety Hall end-of-pier act, or hadn't had their brains boiled by Brexit. And that's another thing that's emerged this morning. They were so obsessed with Brexit that they didn't pay attention to the pandemic. And of course, he gets rewarded now. He doesn't get punished. He doesn't get penalised. The inquiry has no meaningful sanction. Paul Dacre at the Daily Mail and Viscount Rothermere, they've already given him several £100,000 to write bilge every Saturday. And now a bloke called Paul Marshall at GB News, who's trying to buy the Daily Telegraph, has apparently hired him to present television programmes. This is the only country in the world where senior politicians get rewarded for failure. That's not true. There's loads of other countries. We used to call them banana republics. Nadine Dorries has got a column in the Mail, a TV show somewhere. How does that work? How do these people sit around their boardroom tables and say, well, Boris Johnson killed a hell of a lot of Brits, let's give him a newspaper column? Now, up with that sort of thing, there's still a slim outside chance that we might get a peerage out of him, so we better keep him sweet. How does it happen? Oh, it's winding up all the right people. Is that it now? Is that all that's left? When his closest colleagues are describing him in these terms. Unbelievable. 17 minutes after 10 is the time. The people I'd really like to talk to today, and I won't because you won't ring me, but hopefully I'll get some of your texts, are the people who are still clinging to the idea that Boris Johnson was a good guy, still clinging to the idea that Boris Johnson was anything other than all of the things that his closest colleagues have described him as now. Never mind critics like me. His closest colleagues, his confidants, the people he appointed. How does it work? How do you feel today? Like the sort of civilian equivalent of Nadine Dorries. Here's one. Bring back your stand-ins. My God, you are boring. Try talking about something else apart from Boris. There's a COVID-19 inquiry underway into the quite possibly avoidable deaths of tens of thousands of your fellow citizens caused by your political hero. No wonder you want us to talk about something else. You've got blood on your hands. Still cheering him now. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I still don't have a flipping question to ask you, to be honest, except this. Now you know. They'll die soon anyway, said Johnson in COVID. And they have to report it now. Has to be in the Telegraph, has to be in the Mail. Even they are not so shameless as to look away from this. It won't get anything like the coverage that Keir Starmer's perfectly innocuous curry in Durham got. I think that was 13 front pages, was it, in the Daily Mail? But they can't not report it. They won't add a large reason why the Prime Minister got away with this is because we were encouraging him to completely prioritise the economy over the lives of British people because we were worried about not selling enough newspapers or seeing a dip in advertising. But he did it, and he would have done it anyway. I wonder whose lives they thought were worth saving. Any thoughts on that? So, now you know. You suspected it before. You didn't know for certain. You didn't know for sure. You didn't know with absolute, irrefutable knowledge that the Prime Minister cared more about the money men than he did about your mum. And now you do. So how does it make you feel? 0345 6060 973. They'll die soon anyway. Why are we destroying the economy for people who will die anyway soon? And if you were waving your flag, if you were wearing your Boris badge, if you were shouting about how he got all the big calls right, try, if you can, to return to reality, to reflect upon what happened to you, and then tell me how you feel today. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. They'll die soon anyway. Why should we bother helping them? 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Okay, here's another question as well. If you did lose someone, I'm sorry. And if you still wonder whether it was an avoidable death, don't think me crass, but does this make it better or worse? Does knowledge help? Does letting the light in actually act as a sort of salve? Because it's better than having unanswered questions. It's better than having suspicions. It's better than having fears. I don't know. What do you think? 0345 6060 973. Will's in Lincoln. Will, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
I've always been concerned about Brexit, and with Brexit, you've now found that they weren't thinking about the economy with Brexit.
That's true. Yes.
They weren't thinking about the effects of the economy when Liz Truss and Coddy Quarter crashed it, and yet it was priority during COVID, and lives weren't.
It's just an inconsistency there, or a hypocrisy. And just to clarify why we've brought Brexit into it, if anyone's just tuning in, well, part of the reason is we always do, but specifically, it was prioritised over tackling COVID-19 in the early days of the outbreak, a former health minister has said this morning. Boris Johnson, according to Lord Bethell, became a health minister in March 2020. He did everything he could to avoid focusing on the pandemic.
My biggest concern is that the people who need to see what the full inquiry aren't seeing it. It's not on the mainstream media.
Oh, it
There's
is,
only,
mate.
like,
No, it is. It's all over it's on page 9 of the Daily Telegraph, and there's a big front page splash about Dominic Cummings insisting that the chief medical officer, that Valence and Whitty weren't brought in to defend him on the Barnard Castle stuff. That's simply not true. It's getting covered everywhere. It wasn't last week, but it is this week.
Right, I do apologise.
That's all right.
Behind.
That's all right.
But the TV-wise, it's not getting enough coverage then.
Well, it's running live now on Sky News and BBC. Right. So I promise we won't clip this up and make you viral, Will. All right. Every screen in front of me is literally running the inquiry live, and of course it can't lead the 10 every night because of what is happening in the Middle East and other stories unfolding. But they can't look away now.
They do always seem to forget the priorities and only look what is positive for the Tory party to stay as the number one party currently. And I'll give you that. And I'm not seeing any responsibility being taken. And in fact, you know what? I'm sticking up for them. I've just got to page 14 of the Daily Mail before I found half a page about what emerged yesterday. And it doesn't even have it's got top Mandarin Blusk's weak ministers in COVID cabinet. It doesn't, I presume, I'll check the article now. I presume it goes into the comments that Boris Johnson reportedly made about essentially prioritising the economy over people. But I'll give you that. But the Daily Mail isn't the mainstream media. It's not all of the mainstream media. It's not even considered a trustworthy source by Wikipedia. But make of that what you will. So I'll check that article when I get the chance and see whether or not they even mention it. Because remember, he's a Daily Mail columnist now. Listen, early mention of the new book. It's out on Thursday, How They Broke Britain. There's a chapter on Boris Johnson and there's a chapter on Paul Dacre, who gave him a column on the Daily Mail and who Boris Johnson not only wanted to give a peerage to, but wanted to put in the chair at Ofcom, the broadcast regulator. So if there is no mention in this article, or if it is buried halfway down or 3/4 of the way through, that is why. It's cronyism in its purest, sickest, grossest form. And it has infected the very, very highest levels of the British media. And, of course, British government. Yasmin's in Lewisham. Yasmin, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I graduated from medical school March 2020, so I was amongst the first group of junior doctors.
That is literally when Lord Bethell became a health minister.
Yeah, and we were given the opportunity to take up early medical licenses to start working in the COVID pandemic.
I remember.
So I was started. I probably shouldn't say the name of the hospital trust,
of course not,
but I'll say it was the best infectious diseases centre in London, where they had set up services for when the major infectious diseases that come, we were set up for that all purposes. And I've been waiting for the COVID inquiry to come out so that the public can see truly how much it was utterly made up, the daily news broadcast that we would see the Prime Minister giving, that we have delivered X amount of masks, of PPE, of oxygen, and in this best infectious disease centre in the country in intensive care, that same day we were receiving plastic bin bags of masks made by primary schools locally to us. Jeez. And that was all we had. They were stapled with stickers, with rubber elastic bands, and that's what we were using to protect ourselves and care for the people that we were trying our best to save their lives with the little we had.
And on television, you were seeing a reality being described that simply didn't exist. Completely
far from the truth. And we were thinking that if we are supposed to be, we had 5 floors of intensive care converted. So supposedly the biggest intake of the sickest patients. We weren't getting anything. And all of us would be in that room watching this, just pulling our hair out, thinking, well, where is it all going?
Do you know what else happened in March 2020 when you got your licence?
No, remind me.
He had a 41-minute private meeting with Evgeny Lebedev, the son of the former KGB spy that he later put in the House of Lords, just days before he announced the first national lockdown. So this comment from Lord Bethell that he was completely uninterested in anything but
well, in anything, really. But the pandemic was not even on his list, not even on his to-do list, while you were already at the coalface with your colleagues. It's frankly staggering. And you've reminded me, Yasmin, actually, because I was wondering 10 minutes ago in my head, how did we know? I mean, why are we so unsurprised by what is now emerging? And the answer is because people like you told us. You described the reality of what was going on. And it was at complete odds with what the politicians and the client media was telling us.
Yeah, and we were all accused of being conspiracy theorists and not supporting the country when
That's right.
we were doing all we could.
Well, we did get a nice clap every Thursday, remember?
Yeah, that was lovely. That was great.
So how do you feel today? It's not a question I usually ask on the phones because it's so nebulous and vague, but I make occasional exceptions. As you learn about the then Prime Minister saying, why are we shutting down the economy to look after people who would die anyway? These are the people that you're working to save, and he is essentially writing them off. How does that make you feel today?
Honestly, there's no sense of shock to it because you were seeing that rather than being delivered more oxygen, we were told to change the target of oxygen saturation levels to reduce the use.
Wow.
So seeing these comments come out, it just completely matches the attitude of the resources and support we were given. And one thing I really can't wait to see from the inquiry is now the name of the temporary hospital they set up at the time.
Yes.
So many things have happened since COVID, so I can't remember it.
The Nightingale Hospital.
The Nightingale,
yes.
Yeah, that's it. The criteria to send a patient there was utterly unachievable for the people who were sick enough to be in hospital. So I really want to see when they reach that stage, how many patients actually were in that. And they were hailing it a success. And I can't give any accurate numbers, but from speaking to colleagues at the time, it was less than a third full at any one point.
I don't think it was even that full. We'll find
even
out.
A third,
I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure they were empty, weren't they, or largely? But you're right. It will emerge, Yasmin. Thank you, and thank you for what you did, and indeed what you do. 33 minutes after 10 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headline. It is 10:36 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've used the phrase circular firing squad a few times. They're never as much fun as you think they're going to be. It was probably inevitable, for example, that the chief champions of Brexit would all start blaming each other for the failure of Brexit, or indeed blaming anybody, blaming the boogie. But when the absolute horror show of Boris Johnson's government finally came into the light, and I don't know that I expected it to happen this quickly. I mean, if he was still Prime Minister, would the inquiry be unfolding in quite the way that it is unfolding, of course? Would the coverage be unfolding? Can I take a minute just to run you through something? Because I think I got it a bit wrong at the top. If Boris Johnson had signed up with the Daily Telegraph as a columnist instead of the Daily Mail, then you wouldn't today have a front page story about criticising Number 10 for trying to strong-arm Valence and Whitty into backing Dominic Cummings. A very good story. You wouldn't have a full page on page 9 detailing the revelations yesterday, topped with the comments about they'll die soon anyway, so why are we harming the economy? You wouldn't even have a critical editorial comment on page 17. You'd have what you have in the Daily Mail, which is a half-page story, not written by the political editor or the deputy political editor or a political correspondent. Some poor soul called Ryan Hooper has stuck his name on this because you collect bylines like Figurine Panini stickers when you're on a national newspaper. But and no criticism of him, he's just doing what he was told. But the idea that you could write up yesterday's revelations without mentioning Boris Johnson saying that, and I'm reading it twice as I speak to you, because I still, even me, as a relatively regular critic of what the Daily Mail has done to our country, I can't quite believe that they would have the sheer gall not to put that in, until I remember that they're paying him £1 million or £500,000 a year to write a column every Saturday. So how can they tell you the truth about what's happening at an inquiry into how tens of thousands of British people died, including former readers of the Daily Mail? We can't tell you the truth because we're paying the bloke responsible for it £500,000 a year to write about Barbie. And you think I exaggerate sometimes how bad things are, how bent things are in this relationship between the Tory party and the client media. So they've tried to turn it into a criticism of other ministers without mentioning the fact that Boris Johnson himself was talking about letting people die in order to save the economy. 10:39 is the time. Alice is in Northwich. Alice, what would you like to say?
I am totally enraged by the situation because this was dereliction of duty and misconduct in a public office by Sunak and Johnson on an industrial scale. And what I most fear is that there will be no retribution for these two because they both have reason to be able to go and live in the USA. And we have no extradition agreement.
Well, they're not. Blimey, I don't think that's even going to happen. As the inquiry doesn't have any particular sanction, and the idea of criminal charges being brought is slim to disappeared. I would have thought, but you don't need to. All I'm saying is you don't need to bring America into it. They're going to walk away scot-free, and Boris Johnson's already filling his pockets with money coming from the media organisations that didn't report on how awful he was when it was blindingly obvious to everybody with a fully functioning cerebral cortex.
Well, yes, but I mean, right, leave America out of it. But I mean, this was dereliction of duty and misconduct in a public office.
Yes. Yes, I mean, it just is, isn't it? I don't really see how. I mean, we're not lawyers, you and me, Alice, but
this is no. But I mean, what I would want is that some decent lawyers out there, will bring a prosecution against the pair of them because Sunak is right in there. He was Mr. Moneybags for all this.
Well, he was worse than Mr. Moneybags. The furlough, I think we'll agree the furlough was good. That kept businesses afloat. It kept people, solvent during there were 3 million who were left out, and probably they're even more enraged than you are today. But that was a good scheme, largely a good scheme.
Yeah, it was, but I mean, it wasn't his idea, was it? I believe it came from somewhere else in the first place, and that sort of saved his. But he does seem to. He does. Extent, but the fraud, a huge amount of fraud.
That's true. Which I think he said he's not going to investigate properly. It is a bit mad, isn't it, when you step back from the fray a little bit and wonder why. People got more upset, or people were being encouraged to get more upset about Keir Starmer's curry than Boris Johnson's murderous negligence.
Well, I mean, this is the same thing all the time, isn't it? And, I'll leave it to others.
I shall let you calm down, Alice. I shall let you calm down. And I don't mean that in a Michael Winner kind of way. I just reflect upon the levels of rage that you were feeling when you came on air. 10:42 is the time. It depends what line you pick. It is. This might be part of the problem, This might be part of the problem. You look around and focus on one thing and think, oh, hang on, that might be the more important bit, or that might be the more important bit. For my money, it is they'll die soon anyway from Boris Johnson, which is so of a piece with what we know about him. But you might also be looking at everybody around him, describing him as being simply atrocious. Cabinet secretary at the end of my tether. The team can't deliver anything. We've got a weak team. Hancock Williamson, Dido Harding, number 10 permanent secretaries definitely cannot succeed in these circumstances. Capital letters, it has to stop. He's the cabinet secretary. Dominic Cummings replies, I totally agree. I'm already getting lots of despairing messages from people in meetings with him, and he's careering around on WhatsApp as usual, creating chaos and undermining everybody. His absolutely closest consiglieres, describing him in terms that your worst enemy would think twice about using, and the British media was still blowing smoke up his backside. 10:43 is the time. Jonathan is in Finchley. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm anti-Brexit, anti-Boris, anti-Rishi, anti-Conservative, and obviously the reports of his incompetence don't surprise anybody. I have some.
That's surprising a hell of a lot of journalists who were supposedly covering it at the time, Jonathan. I've seen Nick Robinson describe it as extraordinary. These revelations that have not shocked anybody who was paying proper attention.
Remotely shocked. However. I have some sympathy for the dilemmas faced by the government because during the times of lockdown, there were questions about the price to be paid by the population to save the younger population to save the older population. And that's often brushed under the carpet. It's assumed by everybody that lockdown was the best idea since sliced bread. Everyone else is doing it. We should definitely have done it. We should have done it earlier, harder, for longer.
No, not for longer. That's very important that you don't do that. Earlier and harder would have made it shorter.
Maybe, but even the whole concept of
shutting the airports. I mean, you can leave lockdown out of it. There was a million things they could and should have done. We talked about them every day on the programme. We sat here talking about Heathrow in particular, just truly spluttering incomprehensibly at how an island nation, which had just voted to take back control of its borders, supposedly, was failing utterly to impose any sort of controls on people with the infection coming into the country willy-nilly.
I'm sorry, James, but Israel closed its borders at the time, no flights in and out, and they had the same numbers eventually as the UK.
But they didn't lock down in the same way.
They locked down early and hard. They had surveillance with drones and police knocking people's doors. They had really harsh lockdown. It didn't help. And my point is that whilst I don't have the answer because I'm an ignoramus and I'm not an expert, there were experts who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration.
They were not experts. They've already been described as idiots at the COVID inquiry by people who knew what they were talking about.
Well, I'm sorry, but these were doctors and experts in
no, they weren't.
They were.
Well, okay.
Well, look it up.
So here you are. I think when you called yourself an ignoramus, Jonathan, you may have been practicing the art of understatement.
Perhaps.
You look it up. Have a look at what the current chief medical officer had to say about your man Hennigan, who was part of that ludicrous declaration by a bunch of attention-seeking jokers, and then get back to me. It's 10:45. 10:49 is the time. Does it exist as a tribe? Really, is there a group? Is there a cohort? I possibly get my head a bit turned by it because I've got Idiot's Corner every day in my inbox, and people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dean Dorries get quite a lot of coverage, and of course the Daily Mail acts as a cheerleader. But are there actual Boris Johnson fans out there? I mean, were there ever? His personality, his personal popularity, if his personal popularity ratings had been high, they wouldn't have got rid of him. I guess, we all suffer from the distorted lens of coverage, don't we? Even those of us who like to think that we're somehow above it. Would there be a significant number of people listening to this programme now who are either repenting of their support for a ridiculous human being who should never have been allowed anywhere near power, or shouting at me for, I don't know, peddling lies about him? I honestly don't know if there are any out there. But I do know this, and I appreciate there's been a little bit too much I told you so on today's programme, but I did tell you when the second ULEZ zone was brought in on August the 29th, the ULEZ expansion, I did tell you that the conversation was going to disappear overnight because it was all smoke and no fire. And I can tell you now that there has been a 97% reduction in conversations about ULEZ on social media since August the 29th. And the reason I predicted that so accurately, I wouldn't have gone as high as 97, was because all you had to do is look at what happened with the first ULEZ, the first ultra-low emission zone, and what the impact was, unless there was something unexpected and inexplicable in the pipeline. And, of course, it was introduced by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who joins me now. I suspect that's not the statistic that you're most drawn to, Mr. Mayor, but which statistic are you here to tell us about?
Well, good morning, James, and thanks for that intro. Look, I've always been quite clear. The decision to expand the ULEZ wasn't a difficult one, but I think it was the right one to do. Why do I say that? Because I've seen the evidence of the consequences of air pollution in our great city, around 4,000 premature deaths a year, children with stunted lungs forever, adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma to cancer, dementia to heart disease. And the early results show that ULEZ is working, the expansion is working, because 95% of vehicles seen driving in central London, in inner London, and now in outer London meet clean air standards. And to give you an idea of what that means there are almost 80,000 fewer very polluting vehicles off our streets. And the consequence is now more than 9 million Londoners are breathing cleaner air.
So I suppose the media outlets that didn't like it in the first place are going to focus, indeed they are focusing upon how much money, how much revenue you're raising, because you're still, the numbers sound impressive in percentage terms, but in the first month you've still got 57,800 vehicles paying this £12.50 every day. So that's bad news for them, for the owners of those vehicles.
Absolutely, and I'd encourage them to apply for the scrappage scheme. The really good news is almost 40,000 Londoners have been successful in getting support to scrap their motorbikes, their cars, their minibuses, their vans. There are still tens of millions of pounds left in the scrappage scheme. The second point I'd make is, those people who are still having to pay because they've got a non-compliant vehicle. Some of them were still paying before because they drive in central London and in London. But secondly, I'd encourage them to think about the consequences on them by driving a polluting vehicle inside the cabin of a car or a van or a minibus. And there are still a lot of money available, all from City Hall, none from the government. Please apply for support.
What are you going to spend the money on?
So in the short term, so up until 2026, TfL estimate there will be net revenues coming in from those who either pay the £12.50 or pay a fine. Every penny of that money is reinvested in public transport. A good example is the new Superloop in Outer London, an orbital bus line. By 2026, because the number of non-compliant vehicles keeps on going down, number of compliant vehicles keeps on going up, that means there will be no net revenues coming in. This policy is not to raise revenues. This policy is to help clean up the air. It's one of the few examples where the Commissioner of the TfL doesn't mind less money coming in because you can see the benefits of cleaner air.
When Rishi Sunak talks about the war on motorists, he was pretty much talking about you, wasn't he? ULEZ would have been at the very, very top of that list. How significant is this absolute disappearance of chatter about it? And I kind of knew it was going to happen because of what I do for a living. Were you confident that it would almost be debarbed once it was actually in place as a political weapon? Because they've staked quite a lot on it.
Yeah, look, I've always been quite clear, quite candid, the reasons why we embarked on this journey back in 2017. Back in 2017, when you and I spoke about it, you remember the unhappiness in central London. At that stage, by the way, only 39% of vehicles were compliant. So you can see the sort of, in inverted commas, risk I was taking. But the evidence was clear. And if you believe in evidence plus your values, it's quite clear what the conclusion is going to be. And what the Tories have done is they basically, their entire strategy for the next general election is based upon a by-election in Uxbridge and Ruislip. That's their choice to make. I'm quite clear in relation to the benefits of the ULEZ, the biggest clean air zone in the world, which is why other cities across the globe, not just the country, are copying it.
Moving on from that to your recent call for a ceasefire in Gaza, puts you slightly at odds, not for the first time, with the Labour leadership. You were at odds with them over this, actually, weren't you, as well? What do you think about the suspension of Andy McDonald?
Well, can I just make this point, which your listeners will understand?
You can, but then you will have to answer my question.
Of course I will. It is just looking at what's happening in Israel and in Gaza must break your heart. It must make you angry. It must make you distressed. Yes, of course you've got to condemn what Hamas did, the terrorist organisation, killing, butchering, torturing more than 1,400 people, still having, in captivity more than 200 hostages. But you've also got to condemn what's happening in the Gaza Strip, with the loss of thousands of lives. I think last night was more than 9,000, more than 2,000 children. It is heartbreaking. And that's one of the reasons why I've called for a ceasefire, to de-escalate violence rather than escalation, as indeed have many, many others, including countries, the United Nations, and so forth. In relation to, look, I'm quite clear, rather than get into a long debate about the merits or demerits of that particular chant, whether it's lawful or unlawful.
Well, no, it's not the chant. Hang on.
I speak to Jewish Londoners every day who get scared by the chant, who get scared and are really worried about the chant. Whether or not it's lawful is irrelevant. So I think the Labour Party is going to investigate this.
Well, hang on, that's not what I'm asking you about. Andy McDonald said this: we will not rest until we have justice, until all people, Israelis and Palestinians, between the river and the sea, can live in peaceful liberty. What is wrong with that?
Well, I'm not the person investigating Andy McDonald. It's the Labour Party officials who will investigate what Andy said on the protest. What I'm saying is linked with what Andy said, which is, look, it doesn't matter whether it's lawful or unlawful. The fact is, it is causing distress to people in our city. It is leading to people I've spoken to not leaving their homes, asking the question, should their kids be sent to a school? So, there's a separate discussion about whether it's lawful or unlawful, separate discussion about whether...
But we're not talking about the chant. We're talking about what Andy McDonald has said. I appreciate what you're saying, but it's not really relevant to what I asked you.
Well, with respect, within the chant,
we're not talking about the chant. No, the phrase "the river and the sea" has been used by the Israeli ambassador to describe the future of Israel.
Well, which is why I'd call on everybody just to reflect on whether, bearing in mind the sensitivity of what's happening in London and around the country and around the globe with a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, whether we should be using language that inadvertently, I'm sure nobody intends to divide communities or incite hatred, well, a small minority do in fact, whether that sort of those sort of words, whether it's in a speech or in a chant, are the right things to do in a society where we take pride in our diversity.
What about Suella Braverman describing the protests at the weekend as hate marches?
I think she should ask herself the question is this: do we, as a cornerstone of our democracy, want to encourage people to be going and protest, to be emailing their MPs, to be lobbying politicians, or do we want them to go underground into the hands of charismatic preachers of hate? The vast majority of the hundreds of thousands who've been marching on our streets over the last 3 weekends have been peaceful, lawful and safe. A small minority may have broken the law. Small minority may be in a grey area. What the Home Secretary should be doing is working with the police to clarify the law, if that's the concern she has, but reflecting on the fact that what she is in danger of doing is making a sweeping generalisation about hundreds of thousands of lawful, peaceful citizens, doing a democratic thing, going on a protest.
Sadiq Khan, many thanks. And obviously we'll be keeping a close eye on these numbers. When just remind me when you would expect there to be hardly any money being raised at all by ULEZ?
So by 2026, TfL predict there'll be no net revenues coming in. TfL will also, like they did with Central London and Inner London, be publishing data at 1 month, as they've done today, 6 months and 12 months.
Okay, so we catch up in 5 months' time, do we?
In relation to this issue,
yes.
in relation to the air quality benefits. But net revenues are expected to go down for the obvious reasons. We've reported today almost 80,000 fewer non-compliant vehicles. Hopefully, the next time we speak, there'll be even more non-compliant vehicles, which means you don't pay a penny more to drive your vehicle. You get the benefits of cleaner air.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks indeed. The time is 11 o'clock. Keir Starmer, of course, not calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which is causing him quite a few problems at party level, but he is due to deliver a speech in the next hour or so in which he will attempt to explain his position and indeed take questions. So we'll be covering that as well. It's 11 o'clock. It is 4 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where is it Idiot's Corner? For goodness sake, how much longer do we have to put up with these gerrymandering of figures? Or someone, presumably with reference to ULEZ, what they do is they count all the cars that have come into the ultra-low emission zone, mate. They count them all, right? Then they check the number plates and see which ones are compliant and non-compliant, and then you get hit with a £12.50 fine if you're non-compliant. And when you subtract the ones that have been hit with a fine from the ones that haven't been hit with a fine, then you get the number of cars that haven't been hit with a fine. So it's called counting. Right? So a complicated theory for some, I grant you, although it's nice of you to cut the ribbon on Idiot's Corner this morning. But it's not even disputable, I don't think. Some of the stuff is disputable about particulates in the air and whatever else you want to talk about. But in terms of counting compliant cars and counting non-compliant cars, you boiled your brains if you think that that's complicated or conspiratorial. But anyway, I'm always here to help. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm going to pick up on something that I just talked to Sadiq Khan about. You heard him there describing Suella Braverman's latest contribution to public discourse as being in danger of making a sweeping generalisation about hundreds of thousands of lawful, peaceful citizens doing a democratic thing, going on a protest. So the number of arrests was relatively small, and I say that relative to public protests. There was some disgusting things have been photographed on these marches in solidarity with Palestinian people. And remember that I was off last week. I wasn't paying quite as much attention to the news last week as I usually do, for reasons that I'm sure you will understand. But there were 2 women photographed with hang gliders on their shoulder, which was clearly a reference to one of the modes of attack that the Hamas terrorists used on October the 7th. So that's pretty gross. That's despicable, right? I think we could all agree, or almost all agree, that was disgusting. And the figures this weekend were about 100,000. Again, I wasn't paying as much attention last week, so I don't know if that's an increase on the previous. And there are some people there who are clearly terrorist sympathisers, but a relatively tiny number. And I'll tell you how I know it's a relatively tiny number. Not just the authorities, but my goodness me, everybody will have been looking for them desperately. The people who are keen to portray all Muslims as terrorists, or all Muslims as terrorist survivors, an experience that people of Irish extraction will be familiar with from the 1970s and 80s. They are very, very hard-working, those people. They love nothing more, because that's the only way you can really justify what's happening in Gaza now. I don't know where the line is between what is justifiable and what is not, but I think it's close to being crossed if it hasn't been crossed already, because there comes a point where you say, how many people have to die in order to pursue your position? How many people would you be comfortable with? And of course, the question that we stumbled on yesterday that is most helpful as a counterfactual is to say, how many Israeli people would you be comfortable seeing killed in pursuit of Hamas if Hamas were hiding in Israel? So the people desperately trying to make all Gazans members of Hamas or all Muslims supporters of terror are very, very busy. And they have columns in magazines and newspapers, and they're all over Twitter desperately trying to find evidence to support the myth that all people who feel heartbroken at the current plight of the Palestinian people must somehow be supportive of the murderous death cult that is Hamas. I still can't believe I have to say that out loud. I still can't believe I have to say that out loud. But I respect the fear that people feel when they see what they believe to be a massive show of anger being directed towards the Jewish homeland, that is Israel. I do respect that fear for reasons that I've explained many times and will never stop explaining, because it was a penny drop for me. I never fully got it until you explained it to me. The history of pogrom, persecution, Holocaust, creating a mindset that the rest of us cannot fully empathise with. You can imagine and you can sympathise, but you can never know what it is like to grow up as a persecuted person who is never safe, even in your own home. Think of the people. I don't think there were any Jews getting off a plane in Dagestan yesterday morning, but imagine if there had been. We touched on that. So that's what hate looks like. It looks like what we saw in Dagestan. It's a marauding mob of men looking for Jews. And it happened in the 21st century in glorious Technicolor, right in front of our eyes, yesterday morning in a republic in the former Soviet Union. And it is as shocking to me as it is unshocking to you as a Jew. And we talked at length yesterday and in depth yesterday about what was going on. But to claim that if I had gone on that march in solidarity with people who want peace and a homeland, I would somehow be engaging in an act of hate is pretty gross, isn't it? And yet, have a listen to your Home Secretary speaking yesterday.
Let me explain what we've seen over the last few weekends. We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches. Now, secondly, the police and the Crown Prosecution Service are operationally independent, so it's not for me to provide a running commentary on the specific legal decisions that they are making in real time on the ground. But what the police have made clear is that they are concerned that there's a large number of bad actors who are deliberately operating beneath the criminal threshold in a way which you or I, or the vast majority of British people, would consider to be utterly odious. Now, we keep our laws under review, and if there is a need to change the law, just as we did in relation to Just Stop Oil protests last year, I will not hesitate to act.
You referenced chanting. Is it your view that the chant that we hear at some of those protests, from the river to the sea, that one, is anti-Semitic in all contexts, and do you think people should be being arrested for chanting that?
As I said, I'm not going to get into matters which are operationally independent for the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. They need to make those decisions based on the facts and the evidence as they see them. But I have made my views clear. These are hate marches, and the police must take a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism.
What does she mean? I'm tempted to ask what she's playing. My God, she's awful, isn't she? I mean, it is an astonishing gift that the modern Tory party has to put forward people that you think are the very epitome of awfulness and then find someone who's worse. Who would have laughed if I'd said, "Don't be careful what you wish for. If you think Boris Johnson should have sacked Priti Patel for being a bully, be careful what you wish for because the next one might be worse. The next Home Secretary might be worse." Did I say Foreign Secretary in the introduction to that clip? I've got a feeling I might have done. But hey-ho, you're ahead of me already. Why is she doing that? You know, the idea that the whole march is an act of hate is so obviously not true. There were more arrests, for what it's worth, at the Countryside March, the Countryside Alliance March. I don't know if you remember that. And there were more injured police officers as well. So was that a hate march? All of these marches, by the way, involve the fencing off of statuary. So sometimes there's a claim, if it's a Black Lives Matter march or a pro-Palestinian march, there's a claim that these people hate our country because, look, they've had to protect the statues. I always reach for the Countryside Alliance march at that point and remind people that it applies in all circumstances. That's what happens in crowd management scenarios. But I forget the exact numbers, but there were definitely more arrests at the Countryside Alliance march. Admittedly, there were way more people. But there were also more injured police officers. So what's she up to? 0345 60 973. Also, that line there about people who are operating below the bar of criminality or something. Well, that means they're not behaving criminally. Do you see what I mean about how awful she is? Yes, there's some people over there not breaking the law. But whoa, down with that sort of thing. Down with not breaking the... she's up to... Well, is she up to something? We're back to awfulness versus conspiracy, aren't we? But it's such an inflammatory thing to say. 100,000 British people marching in solidarity, sorrow. Conservative minister got, or a senior Conservative politician got demoted from his job yesterday by Rishi Sunak simply for calling for a ceasefire, which is an expression of sympathy. Let's say sympathy rather than solidarity. An expression of sympathy. If there'd been a big march after the October the 7th terror attack, out of solidarity and sympathy with Israel and Israelis, the people who'd been attacked, how could that have been described as a hate march? Who would have dared to use that language for people marching in sympathy with Israel? Or people just gathering, perhaps, in Trafalgar Square, lighting candles in sympathy with Israel. So when 100,000 people gather to march in sympathy with Palestinians, with Gazans in particular, with people who are seeing, the death toll of children alone into double figures daily, I think, why would she describe it as a hate march? Okay, I'm not today, I don't think I'm minded to have you tell me why it is a hate march. I think it categorically isn't. If they have a significant infestation of terrorist sympathisers on those marches, then I will stand corrected. But at the moment, I'm just counting, and there were more arrests at the Countryside Alliance March in 2000 and something. So it's clearly not a hate. That's why they're searching so hard, claiming that there's a Hamas flag when it turns out to be nothing of the sort, or an ISIS flag. So there will be some right old scumbags on that march. But guess what? You gather 100,000 people anywhere at random, and there'll be some right old scumbags in that crowd. So make no mistake that there will be people who are there to express sympathy with terrorist organisations, and you will have seen photographs of them. And the reason you've seen photographs of them is because they are extraordinary. They quite literally stand out in a crowd. There's a reason why that's a figure of speech. So why would Suella Braverman want to take extremist examples, or even perhaps invented examples, and use them to malign and denigrate 100,000 British people? 0345 6060 973. I'm interested in what you think is going on here politically, personally, even perhaps psychologically. Why would she want to do this?
Why would she want to malign 100,000 people? So let's say, even if there were 1,000 terrorist sympathisers there, 2,000, 5,000, that's 5% of a crowd. I don't think there was anything like that number, but let's pretend that there was. Why would she use 5% of a crowd to malign 100% of it? Why would she do that? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:17. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. It was, even by the standards of somebody who rather arrogantly dismissed a Holocaust survivor's request that she moderate her language regarding refugees because it reminded the Holocaust survivor of how the Nazis spoke about her family before murdering them. Even by the standards of somebody like that, and that is a description, if you weren't aware, of Suella Braverman. Even by the standards of Suella Braverman, it was such an odd and unnecessary intervention. So why did she do it? Some answers perhaps are obvious. Pete in Accrington says, I've been teetering on the edge of this for a while, James, but I'm now certain she is an Islamophobe. It's as simple as that. Bernard in Swansea says, is it because she's not very well? Robbie suggests it increases her popularity with the far right. She has always pandered to them. And Rick in Barnet says, it's simple, James. She's a culture war junkie, and there's no scab she won't pick at in order to divide us. I wonder if this is going to be one of those questions that draws a consensus. And of course, if you were on this march, these marches, these protests, how do you feel about being described as part of a hate movement, an act of hatred, part of an act, a mass act, or an act? Is it a mass act of hatred or an act of mass hatred? Who knows? Kreenar's in Queen's Park. Kreenar, what would you like to say?
James, thanks very much for having me on. First-time caller. Right, so I happen to be one of those 500,000 odd peaceful protesters on Saturday.
It was about 100,000, wasn't it?
Well, again, if you look at BBC News, if you look at The Guardian, they say tens of thousands. I'd argue it was at least a couple of 100,000.
Okay,
but
who knows? Go on.
But for me, unfortunately, it's a double whammy here, James, because I'm Albanian and I went to the peaceful protest on the Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Now, as you can appreciate, Suella Braverman demonizes me on being Albanian, and she now calls me a hate march for peaceful protest and for literally shouting out, we want ceasefire and we want it now. Why do we want a ceasefire? Because there's thousands upon thousands of little children and kids being slaughtered as we speak. Every 10 minutes in Gaza, there's a child that dies, right? Now, in this country, unfortunately, to a large degree, we are being almost criminalized for showing a bit of compassion, right? Now, if I show a bit of compassion on the Israeli side and then go, look, Palestinians is worse because it is worse, because numbers don't lie, I get shot down, you know? And we've seen it with MPs now, we've seen it with employers doing the same thing, and I just don't think it's right.
So why has she done it? What do you think her motivation is here? Because you can speak very, very simply about yourself.
Sure.
You are calling for a ceasefire. Netanyahu has overnight put forward his rejection, the reasons for his rejection of that. It's a position some people are supportive of inside and outside Israel. But the idea that you can't have a conversation about it or you can't disagree with Netanyahu is patently absurd. But you were there calling for a ceasefire, not expressing support for Hamas or anything as disgusting or as ridiculous as that. And you have been lumped in by the Home Secretary as part of a movement of hate. Why do you think she's done that to you?
So just a quick remark on the Netanyahu point. I think he's selectively playing with the Bible here. I think he's vastly ignoring "Thou shalt not kill."
To be fair, mate, everybody who mentions the Bible ever is selectively playing with it. Even the Pope.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the, I guess in terms of Suella, I've been pondering on this, and I can't quite point.
No, I can't either.
Towards something, but
you say some of these people. Some of these people are disgusting. Some of these people are engaging in appalling behaviour. I have seen some photographs in the Daily Mail or on Twitter that are absolutely gross. She can say all of that. But she said it's a hate march. Everybody there is part of a process of hatred.
Yeah, and I think if you go against that, though, James, you've seen a few MPs now that they're getting the kick, right? So if you go against the general narrative, and that is the Israelis are right, they have, the right of self-defense. What that self-defense entitles them to do, no one's quite clear, but they just seem to get the green pass to do anything they want. And I think Suella is just largely jumping on that bandwagon and going, yeah, you know what, this is a hate crime, it's anti-Semitic, it's this and that. Do people not ponder that the Palestinians are actually Semites themselves?
Right? Yeah, so again, I mean, the Semitic semantics are always interesting, but I think everybody's pretty clear about what is meant in the context of anti-Semitism. In this conversation, it's Jew hatred. You're correct. Historically, that the Semitic peoples are not exclusively Jewish. I think it's more of a geographic origin than a religious one. But we all know what is meant. Of course, you will hear. I don't know whether this still holds true, but it certainly held true until relatively recently. You would probably hear more objectively anti-Semitic chants and shouts at a Tottenham Hotspur football game coming from opposing fans than you would on this march. I think. I mean, just putting that out there. And I don't know whether Suella Braverman would malign every Chelsea fan, for example, as being engaged in acts of hate because some scumbags in the stands were shouting anti-Semitic abuse at Tottenham Hotspur fans. I'll pick up on this, Ian, because it's fairly measured, so it's not one for Idiot's Corner. You wouldn't be concerned if a crowd of 100,000 contained 5,000 terrorist sympathisers? Of course I would, mate. You've misunderstood me, and I don't think you've done so deliberately, which is why I'm responding. I'd be deeply concerned. But I wouldn't use it to malign the 95,000 left as terrorist sympathisers. That's all I was saying. And nor should the Home Secretary. Well, in fact, especially nor should the Home Secretary. Thank you, Karina. Errol's in Edmonton. Errol, what would you like to say? Why has she done this?
I think, to be honest, I think she's gaslighting. I think she's trying to incite some sort of conflict. We've already seen it where I was at the march on Saturday, and there was a select few with England flags saying Muslims go home, terrorists go home, which the police were expecting. Fair enough, because that would have started the...
I think one of the... But there's been 5 charges, and I think one of them was it involved a public order offence that involved abuse of someone protesting, if you see what I mean, which might fit with what you're describing to us. And just before you continue, I've been sent a picture of... See, the thing is, this is the point I'm making. I've seen this picture now hundreds of times, and it's the same picture, and it contains a phrase that most of us won't be familiar with, but which comes from the Hamas Charter. It says, "Now do you understand why the trees and rocks will have to speak?" And so someone is holding up a placard that seems to express support for Hamas, which is disgusting, and it's an act of sympathy. But if it was true of the entire crowd, I wouldn't be seeing the same picture recycled time and time and time and time again as evidence of how awful they all are. It's only evidence of how awful the woman holding it is. But that's my view. Carry on with yours.
No, of course. And I think she needs to understand what she's supporting in terms of the likeness of what we're hearing from some of the Israeli government officials, like a tweet coming out from their prime minister to say, we are the children of light, they are the children of darkness.
Yes.
Which he then repeated it, changed the wording slightly and repeated it in his speech the other day. It's just going to cause so much anger, because I honestly haven't heard anything like that other than going back to Hitler, when he said the sacred mission of the German people was to assemble and preserve the most valuable racial elements and raise them to a dominant position.
It's not quite the same, is it? But because it's not bringing race into it or ethnicity. But and also it's always a little bit unhelpful, perhaps, to draw any comparison between the Nazis and the Israeli government. So I'd appreciate it if you didn't go there.
Apologies for that.
That's all right. You don't have to apologise. Just don't do it again.
Yeah, I think for me, that the anger that I've felt, just purely because my religion's been weaponized at this precise moment in time, is I'm a rational person. I can take what they say with a pinch of salt, be angry, and not go and attack Jewish people, attack the Jewish religion, because I know that the majority of the Jewish religion are for peace.
So if you were on that march saying, I don't want anybody to die, I don't want anybody else to die, you've been accused of a sort of hate offence by the Home Secretary. That doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. I think even to be completely honest, the people that were speaking on stage, like the gentleman that's lost his job
Yeah, Andy McDonald.
Yesterday. His statement was, and I understand why people are getting incited by this and getting upset by this statement, but he said that both Palestinians and Israelis will be free from land to sea. And that's not, for me, him saying that showed his understanding of the situation, that both Israelis and Palestinians are living in fear.
Yeah, well, I'm watching Starmer's speaking now. I can see it in the corner of my eye, and he's taking questions on it. So he's trying to clear up this mess, which began in this studio actually when he was talking to Nick. But the Andy McDonald suspension just seems odd because he's called for people to live peacefully alongside each other. But it's obviously the deployment of the phrase from the river to the sea that's so problematical, which makes it, for me at least, as an outsider, problematical that the current Israeli ambassador in 2015 said, between the sea and the Jordan River, there needs to be one state, only the state of Israel.
I think, well, what's worrying me is I think it's a real hypocrisy of us calling ourselves a democracy when people that are representing us can call for peace and they're losing their jobs over it.
That's an interesting, I mean, I take your point. And two people, of course. There's a Conservative politician who's lost his job as well, or been demoted from his position for calling for a ceasefire. I speak of Paul Bristow, who has been ordered to leave government after he backed a permanent break in hostilities between Israel and Hamas. It is, I mean, you do sometimes wonder whether you need to give your head a wobble, because Errol puts it very calmly. You're now seeing relatively senior politicians being demoted or suspended for calling for peace, calling for a ceasefire. Now, I grant you that a ceasefire can be appeasement under another name. This could be Neville Chamberlain territory. But it isn't necessarily, or even clearly, the case that is so. You've got somebody saying, look, that you've got 1,400 dead Israelis, and now you've got 4, 5, how many thousand dead Palestinians. Can we stop now? Now, you could say, no, you don't understand, we have to do this. But to say, right, you're fired, both of them, Starmer and Sunak, I just find it a little odd, I think. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 36 minutes after 11, that resonated with me. The idea, you don't have to agree with someone who is calling for a ceasefire. But should you be firing them? I guess the case of Paul Bristow is a little bit clearer. He has been demoted by Rishi Sunak, to whom he was an aide, for breaking ranks by calling for a ceasefire. He wants a permanent break in hostilities between Israel and Hamas, and said so in a letter to the Prime Minister, because that's collective responsibility, which I grant you, they don't seem to care much about most of the time, unless, of course, Suella Braverman speaks for the entire government when she calls these marches hate marches, or when she uses language reminiscent of 1930s Germany to talk about refugees. They don't seem to have much time for collective cabinet responsibility most of the time, but on this issue they do, and that is, I mean, historically there is a precedent for that. He went a little further on Facebook saying, ordinary Palestinians are not Hamas. I struggle to see how Israel is any safer following thousands of deaths of innocent Palestinians. But he will be free to pursue this position from the backbenches, which is as it should be. Andy McDonald's situation is even odder. It may be because the Times misreported it. So the Times has issued a correction, and I'll read it to you in full. An earlier version of this article said Andy McDonald MP chanted, "Between the river and the sea, Palestine will be free," at a rally. In fact, he said, until all people, Israelis and Palestinians, between the river and the sea, can live in peaceful liberty. Which, I listen, again, it's possible I'm missing something, but that seems to me to be almost spectacularly uncontroversial. Isn't that what everybody wants? Well, almost everybody. Not Hamas and, well, not presumably the current Israeli ambassador who called for there needs to be one state, only the state of Israel, between the sea and the Jordan River. She said that when she was foreign minister in 2015. I don't know, maybe I'm getting confused about something. It wouldn't be the first time. Anna is in St Albans. Anna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'll tell you what it is. With so much unrest and so much fear within the Jewish community, most of these pro-Palestinian protests erupt in violence. There's something, there's hate that's called out, and I think...
No, they don't, because I have to be clear on this, they don't erupt in violence. There have been I think there were 9 arrests and there have been 5 charges, including people arrested for attacking... Well, I'll run you through it all, actually. There's been a racially aggravated public order offence by a person of no fixed abode who allegedly shouted racist abuse. There's a public order offence after a can of beer was allegedly thrown at a protester in Whitehall. There's been an actual bodily harm charge after an officer was allegedly assaulted and suffered a head injury, which also happened at the Countryside Alliance March a few years ago. And then you've got another racially aggravated public order offence relating to an allegedly racist placard. And then you've got a 16-year-old boy who can't be identified because of his age, has been charged with a public order offence after directing verbal abuse at officers. So you understand I can't let you say they always erupt into violence when they categorically don't.
Well, there is a lot of hate. I mean, they're looking
let's
for
not gloss over. Let's not
wearing...
gloss over it. You have to accept that you cannot say they always erupt into violence when they categorically don't.
No, but there are things that that the police
and if that's
won't
the basis of your
on.
if that's the basis of your position, then your position becomes untenable immediately.
There is hate. Would you not agree with that?
There's hate everywhere. There's hate on the West Bank at the moment. You've seen what the American Secretary
James,
of...
Can I say anything?
Yes, of course you can, as long as it's true.
When you think about the fear that Jewish people are feeling all over the country, something that exacerbates that and something that makes them feel even more scared. I mean, there are no Jewish people that would feel comfortable to go into a Palestinian protest, and even the word
there were Jewish people on it. There were Jewish people on the march, and you've seen the footage from Central Station in New York as well of Jewish people protesting.
They're far extremists, and in terms of their support, their anti-Israel narrative. But that it's not. But if the fact is that people would be scared to go to a protest like that, whereas in direct contrast to that, the Israeli...
But again, I'm sorry you feel I'm interrupting you, but if you say things that aren't true, I have to. There were Jewish people on the march on Saturday.
Okay. But the majority...
So they wouldn't be... You can't say they'd be scared to go, can you?
It is very scary. It is very
scary.
No,
I'm not disputing that you're scared. I'm just disputing your claim that it always erupts into violence and that Jewish people would be too scared to attend to demonstrate their sympathy for Palestinian people being killed. Because neither of those things are true.
No, what I'm not saying is that people can't march in solidarity, but the fact is it's a protest which ends up often being anti-Israel. There were 3 women who were wearing pictures
out of 100,000 people.
That's not the point. The point is that
it is. Of course, it's the point.
Fear.
Of course, it's the point, because you can call those people hateful, you can call those people insightful, but you can't call the march a hate march. Because of what 3 women did.
Between a march and a protest rather than a vigil or like solidarity, there's a big difference.
Well, you can call it whatever you want.
With hate. No, but there is a difference. You can't dispute that.
I can dispute anything I want.
Standing peacefully in vigil and market and thinking about the people that hurt the victims, etc. And absolutely, I think no one wants to see.
So it's the fact that they're walking.
Civilians.
It's the fact that they're walking.
It has a much angrier tone.
Well, there is huge anger about all the Palestinians being killed, just as there was huge anger about all the Israelis killed on October the 7th. You must have been angry. You must have been angry.
I was devastated.
Okay.
It was heartbreaking.
Well, I was angry.
There's a very different... Well, there's a very different...
I was very, very angry. I don't know if you heard the show. I was absolutely livid.
Yeah, but what were you angry about?
The murder of 1,400 Israelis.
But was that anger directed at the horrific terrorists?
Of course it was.
Was that compassion and devastation for the victims?
It was both. Unthinkable, unjustifiable, intolerable were the words that I used to describe what Hamas had done. Heartbreaking, utterly, utterly devastating were the words that I used to describe the victims. So why can't people be angry? Why can't people be angry about Palestinians being killed as well?
I just want to shout out that the first day that you did your show, it was brilliant. You were really compassionate, really kind, really sensitive, absolutely.
And really angry.
Yes, but I think there's more anger. It's about compassion and being devastated.
And being angry.
Do something.
And being angry. So if I'm allowed to be angry about the killing of Israelis, why can't I be angry about the killing of Gazans? Why can't people march in anger at the killing of Palestinians?
It's about compassion. That's the difference.
Okay. So how do people show their compassion?
Anger then says, who can I fight? Anger is who can I punish?
And that's why I had to pick you up at the beginning on the claims that it always erupted into violence when it simply doesn't. So no one's really looking for a fight.
Anger.
No one's looking for a fight.
I don't mean violence I mean violence as in anger, and and that leads on to who can I blame?
You can't. Unfortunately, Suella Braverman might want to outlaw anger, but even she would struggle to pull that one off, Anna. You can't tell people what they can and can't be angry about any more than I would dream of telling you.
Absolutely, but we can have expectations.
Go on.
The anger then channels into anti-Israel.
Well,
that is what happens.
And then it becomes problematic. But until it does, it isn't.
But
and when you say anti-Israel, you could say anti-Israeli army, anti-Likud.
But that's not true.
Well, I don't know that you can read the minds of everybody.
Very interesting. I don't know if you've looked at the works of the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs.
I'm familiar with some of his work, yes.
He has an incredible video that he's explaining how sometimes actually anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. How it's changed over from the Middle Ages.
You're going a little bit off message now because what we're talking.
You're saying that it's not anti-Israel. It's also anti-Semitic.
I'm not. I'm saying you can't read anybody's mind. There are plenty of people in Israel who've got huge problems with what is going on. Are they anti-Semitic?
And that's what I believe Suella Braverman.
Are they anti-Semitic?
No, people can have issues with the policies.
People can be angry about policies, and they can be Jewish, and they can be angry with Israeli policies, but you wouldn't dream of calling them anti-Semitic.
But I haven't heard any pro-Palestinian march that's come out to condemn Hamas.
Well, how much attention have you been paying? How many of them have you spoken to?
Plenty.
Really?
Yeah, it's very interesting having conversations.
But you were too frightened to attend.
An excuse.
You were too frightened to attend.
But I would never go to a protest.
So when did you talk to them?
Other people.
So when did you talk to them?
I've spoken to individuals.
Yeah, when?
With their opinions.
When?
Over the last couple of weeks.
How?
And there's always an excuse.
But how have you spoken to these? How have you spoken? No, of course you can't. Not if you're going to come on my radio and say things that aren't true.
But it is true.
Well, of course it isn't. Every single
Ariana Grande concert.
Well, I don't want to imagine that. I'm talking about marches. Stop it.
I feel bad for the people that were killed, but
you're making stuff up again.
Very, very frustrated.
You're making stuff up again.
No, I'm not. That's exact same parallel.
You're having an imaginary conversation about a completely different atrocity.
No, but what I'm saying to you is the fact is that there needs to be condemnation.
Just before you go, where is your expression? I know you would avail yourself of this opportunity, your compassion for the people being killed in Gaza now.
Absolutely. I said that straight away. I said that earlier on. I said, I do not want to see any innocent civilians, and it's horrific, and it's heartbreaking, and I read an article.
So would you call for it to end then?
I would call for Israel to do whatever it can to.
Well, you can't have it both ways, can you?
It's called self-defense.
Okay, well, that's not called compassion then.
And they've
no, that's fine. We got there in the end.
It is compassion. Of course, there is compassion.
Well, no, because the people marching are calling for a ceasefire, and you're calling for it to complaining that other people aren't being compassionate. So the people calling for the killing to end are the angry ones who are causing fear, and you calling for it to continue are the compassionate one. Do you see where you've ended up, Anna?
No,
you probably don't, do you? 11:50 is the time. We will be catching up with the COVID inquiry. Astonishing that I tell you what, when you see what Dominic Cummings and Lee Kane were saying to each other on WhatsApp, I think it becomes absolutely crystal clear why Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson aren't handing over their WhatsApps. And it's an absolute travesty. But we will crack on with that shortly. I'll read this in reference to Anna's call just before the break from Susanna. I am a Jew who takes a moral position to support the Gazan people rather than a religious one. I was on the march on Saturday with many other Jewish people. We're not a homogenous voice, and I strongly disagree with what I heard and dispute the suggestion that Jewish people are afraid to be out in our cities. You can't do that. Well, I mean, you can, and I've read it out, and I'm happy to do so, but you can't tell other people that they're not scared without calling them liars. And I understand the fear, and I understand that it exists, but what you can't do is base it on things that are demonstrably untrue. for example, a claim that things always erupt into violence, or indeed that there's anything wrong with anger. 11:51 is the time. So what is Suella Braverman up to? There's a bloke who actually used to work in Downing Street who has suggested that she's Islamophobic. I thought twice about reading that out when it came in via text, but a chap who was a race advisor to Boris Johnson has used the same word to describe her in an interview with another radio station, and it certainly gives you pause. But if that's not a fair conclusion to arrive at, what is your explanation for why she has done it? What is your explanation for why she has elected to describe everybody, including Susanna, of course, including you, quite possibly, everybody who went on that march as being part of a hate march? And final word on this, actually, not final, but before I go back to the call, Sacha Lord, who's the nighttime economy advisor for Greater Manchester, just dropped me a tweet saying, from someone who puts on large-scale events and someone who was close to the arena attack in Manchester, your last caller was absolutely deluded. Again, I gallop to her defence and say, well, if she believes what she was saying, then we will listen to it. But we always reserve the right to point out some, let's say, inconsistencies, particularly on the question of who gets to decide what compassion is. Luma is in Orpington. Luma, what would you like to say? What is Suella Braverman up to?
I think it's one way to make people afraid to go and share their views. I've had people come and tell me, say, we don't know if we say the word Palestine, that we will not be branded as terrorists or terrorist sympathizers, which is appalling. I had to kind of sit and explain there's a whole United Nations set up. It's a recognized engagement. It's not a word to say that if you're compassionate with people who are being bombed non-stop, that you are equal to a terrorist. But when you come with a narrative of it's hate speech, it's the same way where last week where suddenly, if you're showing sympathy to the people in Gaza, that's almost like close to Holocaust denial. I think a couple of callers came up with that line. It's like, this is just a way to suppress the conversation.
And you have to, and that's, that leads you to the suspicion that you have to suppress the conversation, because otherwise you come up against the impossibility of avoiding what a couple of callers have done this week, which is essentially to say, no, that the killing of the Palestinians has to continue, regardless of whether it's likely to achieve our ends or however much the final death toll dwarfs the murders of October the 7th. So who's Braverman appealing to then with this? Because you can support Israel and you can oppose a ceasefire without calling peaceful protesters, as in London, hateful.
I think I'm not sure who that is appealing to, because even other than the very extreme views and the views of the official Israeli government, which I wouldn't expect our UK government to be pretty much landing behind, but I can't see the UK. Again, I know we don't generalize. General election will define. I don't feel that the majority of the people on the street take the view of kill to no end, which unfortunately, with the current narrative of no ceasefire, no suspension, if you look at the ground of what the setup is, there is no end game other than wiping out the entire Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I mean, what does the end look like? How much is too much? I feel embarrassed asking such glib questions, but you're right. You're right to remind us that you need. You know, I've seen people try to compare it to the D-Day landings or to elements of the Second World War, and to which you'd respond by saying, well, the objectives there were clear. What is the objective here? The eradication of Hamas. A, how plausible is that? And B, how many Palestinian people have to die before it is A, either achieved, or B, you admit that it hasn't. It hasn't. It just seems odd, heartbreakingly odd. But as I punctuate these conversations with, and will continue to do so, the existential fear with which many Jewish people live is a crucial part of understanding positions that you may struggle to understand. 11:56 is the time. Thank you, Luma. Barbara is in Havant. Barbara, what would you like to say?
Well, I've got stuff to say about the fear of Jewish people. I am a Jewish person, but I'm going to leave that aside for one moment.
Okay.
And I've been pondering, what is Suella Braverman doing here?
Yes.
Well, there's a terrible irony in this woman whose modus operandi is defined by divisiveness, hatred, dehumanising, etc., etc.
Yes.
And it suddenly dawned on me, maybe there's an attempt to conflate those marchers with people on the left and to then try and revive the people on the left are all anti-Semitic stuff that, there was some truth in that. There are left-wing people who do not see the Jews as a persecuted people. We know that. But I think maybe maybe there's an element of that.
Trying to resurrect that Corbyn-era comfort that some anti-Semitic people felt in the Labour Party.
Yes, I wonder if there's an element of that. Also, I'm interested to hear other people sort of daring to hint at the fact that the woman might be Islamophobic, because I've often wondered whether that was not informing some of her policies. But I'd like to say this about fear and being Jewish. Yes. I'm a Jewish person. I'm 74. I think since I was maybe 9 and I realised what the Holocaust was, a day hasn't gone by that in some way I haven't thought or felt or been in the Holocaust, as it were. Yes. And I don't say that glibly, I say that deeply. It has traumatised me personally. My mother's family in Poland were all murdered during the Holocaust. We are a traumatised people, and I think it is precisely because of this trauma that this situation in the Middle East cannot end. We are dealing with the other side, the Palestinians, another traumatised people who've endured decades of trauma and loss and grief. Now, as individuals, we can get help for our trauma. We must acknowledge it. We must understand how it affects us, how it deeply, deeply affects us. And then, in order to move forward, in order for there to be some hope, both in our personal lives and in the Middle Eastern situation, we have to move forward. We have to understand the other person's trauma. We have to understand to what extent this is informing people like Netanyahu, who should not be in government. He's only in government and not in prison because he allied himself with people who would wish the entire Palestinian nation to not exist. Bezalel, I can't remember, Motrich, who lives in an illegal settlement, whose wish is for the Palestinians to disappear, who does not want the Palestinians. We cannot continue like this. Otherwise, there is no wiping out Hamas. There is only creating a new iteration of Hamas that will create even more barbarism and massacre. And there will be murder by the Israeli Defense Force. We must, on an individual and at a state and at every level, recognise the trauma that is informing this dreadful situation.
I think that's so important, what you say. So important. And you can have generational trauma as well. Gabriel Marte is very strong on this, on being handed down. Yeah. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like the coastal shelf.
And you get this thing, but you'd think the Jews would know, having been... No, it doesn't work like that.
I'm afraid I used to labour under that delusion, but I certainly don't anymore. Of course it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work like that. Thank you, Barbara. I needed that, and it's a perfect way to draw a line under that conversation, except to add, if we're talking about politicians who don't deserve to be in power or shouldn't be in power, it's a chap called Samuel Kasumu I was referring to, a former advisor on race matters to Boris Johnson, who has described Suella Braverman as probably Islamophobic and said she does have issues with the Muslim population. So I think we'll chalk that up as the answer to the question of why she's made this remarkable intervention on almost entirely peaceful protests and decided to call them hate marches. That's the only answer I can think of that fits all of the question. 4 minutes after 12, I can't frankly stress enough how explosive some of the detail coming out of the COVID-19 inquiry is.
today. But also, you know, when I've occasionally told you that I wish I could swear on the radio. I say I'm a fan of swearing, but I think creative swearing in the hands of, you know, Peter Cook and Dudley Moore or Ian Dunt. It can be a wonderfully expressive thing. Goodness me, Dominic Cummings has a vocabulary on him. He really does. Some of the language makes the thick of it look like a documentary, which is a joke I stole off somebody who sent it in before I'd actually looked at some of the language being deployed. So we will definitely, Natasha will talk us through that while Henry has been at Keir Starmer's speech. So we've got quite a lot of politics in the coming hour, which I think means I'll allow myself a slightly more light-hearted topic to steer us through. And it is, I wonder how closely you follow the show. Have you been listening for a few years? And if you said non-serious topics, James's favourite non-serious topics, what would you go for first? I wonder. There's no point texting me because I'm going to tell you before your text even arrives. But I am absolutely, as you probably know, if you're kind enough to listen to the show, a lot of love for Barbara coming in, by the way, as you'd expect. I think we all needed a bit of Barbara in our lives this morning. So thank you for your beautifully expressed compassion. Accents. I love them. I don't know why I love them so much. I don't know why I find them so interesting. I got some ideas, some hints. I think that the class system in this country is probably the biggest obstacle to social mobility, even more than socioeconomic status, even more than wealth. I think this idea of walking the walk, or what's been called public school swagger, or whatever it may be. And it may be because I grew up in the Midlands, where the native accents are particularly doer. So you can... I think there's research showing that if you've got a Birmingham accent or a black country accent, then people will presume you're not very bright. Very stupidly, by the way. I mean, I grew up there. It's an absolutely daft position to adopt. But if two people can't... I mean, and then, of course, you have the corollary of that, which would be Jacob Rees-Mogg, a man so stupid that light bends around him. But because he talks like a sort of pantomime toff, people, impressionable people raised on this diet of class and deference think that he's clever. Absolutely breathtaking. I am very fond of bollards, Alex, but I think that you've gathered that from Twitter, not from conversations that I've actually had on the radio. I'm very honoured to say I have been invited to become the honorary president of the World Bollards Association, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that honour yet. It's a wonderful Twitter account, by the way. If you don't follow it, it is just one of my all-time favourites. But so accents, and also being conscious of my own unlived life. You know, there's one of the weird things about being adopted is that you do sometimes, less so as I get older, but you do sometimes wonder about who you'd be if you hadn't been adopted. And I'd be speaking to you now in a Wexford accent. I don't think I can do I can't do a I must not do any accents this hour because I'll get myself into all sorts of bother and all sorts of trouble. But there's an absolute humdinger of a story in the news about accents, which we'll get onto shortly after I've had a look at some of the other things you've suggested that are among my favourite non-serious subjects. I've never done bridges. Tony and Bishop Stortford, I flipping love bridges. I've gone full partridge today. You can't do a phone-in on bridges. I literally can't do a phone-in on what's your favourite bridge. What is it about bridges that are so fantastic? It's just it's not sustainable radio, but you can certainly do a phone-in on accents. And here's a really interesting thing. The King's English and Cockney have all but disappeared among young people. So don't ring me and say, oh, I'm a Cockney. It's among young people. And 3 new accents have emerged. So voice analysis does or looks at the 2 accents that have been overtaken by new accents. So I can do some of these, can't I? So the King's English presumably would be received pronunciation. So Rory Stewart, perhaps, would be a good example of that. I'm always struck by the fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg has contrived to somehow sound posher than
the Prince of Wales. But that's, I guess, what insecurity does to you. So that sort of accent, we know what that is. A Cockney accent is fairly straightforward. I'd probably get this wrong now, but I'd point at would you say Danny Dyer was Cockney? He's almost gone too far in the opposite direction. I was thinking more of Ray. What's his name out of Scum? The actor, Ray Winston. I don't know why I got Ray Winston in my mind on this one, or even Harry Redknapp. I don't know. I mean, but we all got a fairly clear idea of what a Cockney accent is, right? So they're in retreat, which means, and this is the bit that I find most interesting. It means, right, that this is, I mean, I must have been a bit like this, so I can't be too amused by it. It means you're living in a house where the parents and the children speak in completely different accents without any immigration, right? That's obviously going to be relevant. If your parents came here from overseas and you didn't, then you're probably going to have notably different accents for rather obvious reasons. Mickey Flanagan, another good example of the Cockney. But I just find that absolutely fascinating. The idea that you're in the house and it's not regional. So my parents have Yorkshire accents and I don't, but that's because they grew up in Yorkshire and I didn't. So that doesn't really count. I'm a bit posher perhaps than they are, but the idea that your children speak in a noticeably different accent to you absolutely fascinates me. So what do you think the three new ones are? And what examples? Have we got any examples yet? Are we ready with the examples, or are we too? I should probably have decided to talk about this a little earlier to give my crack team of operatives time to assemble some examples. So you're saying goodbye to the King's English and Cockney, and you're saying hello, or well, actually no, you're not saying hello. So that's Leslie Phillips. That's King's English, isn't it? You're saying all right, all right, all right. Saying goodbye to that as well, because that would be Cockney. You're saying hello to Standard Southern English, or Standard Southern British English. Standard Southern British English. This is the modern equivalent of received pronunciation. So this is what would be more commonly associated with people from middle and upper classes. Oh, this is quite posh. I think this might be me. Essex University, who've conducted this study, found that 49% of those surveyed spoke with a standard Southern British English accent. The examples include a syllable stress in the first syllable. So you'd say umbrella and police and cement. No, I don't think I do have that. The examples they give, I've got no idea where this is going as a phone-in, by the way. Leave it with me. So the examples they give for standard Southern British English are Ellie Goulding, the Duke of Sussex, and Josh Widdicombe, who were also both ginger, but I don't think that's relevant to anything. Now, the next one you've got is Estuary English. And the examples for that are Adele, Stacey Dooley, Ollie Murs, and Jay Blades, off that brilliant TV show about fixing things. The examples here are dropped consonants. So butter becomes butter, milk bottled becomes milk bottle, milk bottle, and house becomes harse. Harse. And the final one, multicultural London English. This emerged in the late 20th and early 21st century, spoken mainly by working class people in multicultural parts of London. This is now about 25% of those in the study who spoke with a multicultural London accent. And the examples here include Stormzy, Bukayo Saka, the footballer, and Little Sims, the rapper. And the examples given here, bet for bait, and bought for boat. I don't think I can do this one, which is hardly surprising, really, given how old I am. This was in 2019 that a previous study found Londoners who did not speak in a multicultural London English accent hold much stronger and very negative social stereotypes of multi-ethnolect speakers. So it means there's snobbery involved. But I bet that's changed a bit since 2019, hasn't it? It's got its roots in Cockney, but speakers of multicultural London English pronounce the H at the beginning of words like house and horse in a way that Cockneys wouldn't do. And the vowel sounds in multicultural London English can sometimes be a bit more like Scottish or Newcastle accented vowel sounds. And sometimes they'll be characterised by words having different or double meanings. Have I got any? I haven't got any clips yet. I've got one clip for that. I've got Ellie Goulding as well. So here is Estuary English, Adele.
I really, really want to come to Brazil. I know that everyone there knows that already. I just still haven't been able to get there. But that is the one place that I would really, really love to go. Obviously to come and see all of you lot, but also I'd like to go on holiday there. Very, very much. So that's that question. Oh. Also would love to come to Manila, that's right. Yes, I would. I don't know when. Still a bit of COVID, guys. Oh, my dog just came. Who's that? Come here.
I love the idea that you've just tuned in to that. What the heck is going on? So that's an example of estuary English. Fairly straightforward. And finally, or not finally, but for now at least, an example of standard Southern British English, which Ellie Goulding will provide. Yeah.
It is real, that pressure, yeah. I remember when I released Love Me Like You Do, it was so... I mean, I didn't know it was going to be like a big song, but then obviously like the year that came after it, I ended up doing like a huge world tour with it, and it was just so astronomically big at the time. And I remember we recorded like 50 voices on the chorus, and so it was just so huge. I was like, what do I do next?
I'm going to ask you a slightly cheeky question, and you'll probably be able to work out. I'm going to ask you two questions. You'll probably be able to work out the one that I most want you to answer, because that's the one you probably won't want to. Do you hate your child's accent? 0345 6060 973. Don't be shy on this one. I will ask you to do it. I will ask you to try to do the accent that your child uses that you hate, but you don't have to. But if you want to have a crack at it, that would be great. Do you hate your child's accent? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And just in case everybody is too loyal or shy to dob in their own kids on the programme, do you hate your own accent? That's a really interesting question. 0345 6060 973. And I wonder which one. I don't know. Am I any of those? I don't think I am. I don't know. But I'm very old, and this is about young people. Do you want a quick burst of Stormzy before we go to the? I think you should. So this is your multicultural London English.
Even the idea of like meeting a girl, and then let's just go on a date. Let's just go to get some food. Yeah. That's alarm bells. Like, anytime I've had a date, we gotta go through a back door. You know what I mean?
No. Sorry, Stormzy. No idea at all. So do you hate your child's accent? And it will be done very affectionately and with huge amounts of love, as always on this programme. 21 minutes after 12. Do you hate your child's accent? There's a reason for this. I'm not just trying to sow division. I'm not Suella Braverman. But I can't remember what it is. Anyway, Rita's in Medway. Rita, what would you like to say?
Well, I come from Chatham, which is a language and a dialect of its own. I mean, have you ever been to Chatham?
I have, yes. But not for long enough to pick up the accent, though, Rita.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
Or should I say Rita? Rita, really.
Rita,
yeah.
and it's butter. And Dickeye my Chevy. It's a dialect of its own. It's a mix.
Yes.
My daughter is very Chatham like me. Got a Chatham gob. They call it a Chatham gob.
Right.
But my son, who is a little bit older, he speaks like Stephen Fry. He's very posh.
How did that happen?
He says he is autistic.
Right.
But he's a very high functioning autistic. But it's so strange because when they were growing up, people would listen to us speak and they'd say, "Is he yours?" Because he sounded so posh.
When did it start? Did it start? I mean, literally from speaking. When he could speak, he just said.
Yes, he spoke properly, and he says he's a grammar Nazi as well.
Right.
He says it's not said like he's
really?
He even told one of his teachers that she was grammatically incorrect.
I like him.
And she really laid into him, and he said, "Don't be so rude. That's so rude. How dare you? How dare you?" And he got really upset and didn't want to go back. So I went and spoke to her, and I said, "You know, he wasn't being rude."
Yeah.
She said, "Yes, he was, because he corrected me in front of the class." "What would you have done?" And I said, "I would have said, I won't say his name because he'd be deeply embarrassed."
Yes.
I said, "I would say, well done. Thank you for listening. You must have listened to all my lessons and learnt."
No, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. And was this sort of from first words territory? Sort of, sounded like Stephen Fry at kindergarten.
Basically,
How
yes.
bizarre.
And he is actually
This is
as
lovely.
intelligent as Stephen Fry.
I don't doubt it.
He's just off the chart with his speech.
I love it.
We watch The Chase, and he answers every question, and I just look at him thinking, I don't know where you come from. I don't know where you come from.
But where did the accent come from? I mean, you didn't have sort of Leslie Phillips babysitting when he was little or anything like that. Where did it come from?
I have no idea, because he used to love Thomas the Tank Engine. It was all Thomas. Well, that was
Ringo Starr, though.
Starr.
So he should sound like a Scouser, really.
Yeah, but he doesn't. He sounds... It's beautiful.
That's really nice. Yes, because I was going to say, you're not ringing me to tell me that you hate your child's accent. You're doing the opposite in a way, but you're just struck. You're struck by the incongruity. Have you ever asked him, Rita? Have you ever said, why? Where? I mean, why do you talk? I mean, where did it come? Where does it come from, son?
He says, if you're going to do something, you do it properly.
Oh, I love him. I love him. I love him.
He's amazing, and my daughter is like me. She's
got a touch of the Chris Eubanks, then, has he? Because he was very like that. I mean, and very particular in the way that he spoke. And he would have said something like that, wouldn't he? He'd have said, if you're going to do something, do it properly.
It's when the eyes roll.
At you and his sister.
Yeah,
for
he
heaven's
looks
sake.
at me and his eyes roll, and it's like...
I just love it. I love it. Thank you.
So, and I've always wanted to come on your programme.
Well, this was
I
the
love
perfect.
it.
That was perfect.
Yeah.
The perfect opportunity.
It's diverse. It's funny, sad, in the middle. Brilliant. Love your programme,
Oh, thanks,
James. And
Rita.
I've ordered your book.
Oh, you star. Thank you. I've been very careful not to overplug it. So obviously it's wonderful when someone else does. Thank you. There you go. Sometimes you do an introduction, you take one call and you think, well, that's why we did it. Don't need to talk to anyone else now. We're not going to have much time anyway because there's so much to catch up on. But that was absolutely perfect. The only thing missing, of course, was having him on the extension going, Mother, Mother, what on earth are you doing on the wireless? Raj is in Blackburn. Raj, what would you like to say?
Oh, so we're up north. We've got a right broad Lancashire accent.
I like the Lancashire accent.
And my boy, I just don't know what planet he's on. So he's 12 years old, and at the end of each sentence, it's calm, blood in it.
Fam.
What's in it?
Is that what's in it? I don't know. Is that accent though, or is that does he sound like Fred Dibner, but then he just sticks calm and in it on the end of all his sentences?
So it starts off with a right broad Lancashire accent.
Right.
It's like, right, hey Dad, I did right good in school, innit?
But that's not accent then. That's vocabulary.
Even with the vocabulary, it's like he goes down this Scots accent first.
Yeah.
It then molds into some kind of bad boy southern, like I'm part of a gangster group.
Watch too much Top Boy.
Yeah, probably. Well, he's 12, he's not allowed.
No, quite right too, actually. No, absolutely.
But then towards the end, everything's in it. I'm like, why do you keep saying that?
And what does he say? What are his influences then? Where's he going?
Well, it says it's the in thing.
The in thing.
And I don't know what that even means.
Does he watch YouTubers, YouTube influencers? I don't know.
Yeah,
how old are we
unfortunately.
sounding now? I don't know how old we're sounding now.
Yeah, unfortunately he does.
Because I was always intrigued growing up. Well, not growing up. When I first started doing this job and first managed to introduce my obsession with accents into the programme, I was always wondered whether the kids or the lads that you'd hear on the bus talking like your boy, whether when they got home, they started talking like Rita's boy. So when you're with you, because I think we've all done that. There's a word for it, which will come to me in a moment. There's a word for when you're kind of blending in. You're adapting to your surroundings. So you talk to your friends
And then you get home and you wouldn't talk to your parents like you talk to your friends. But your boy it sounds as if he's talking like this all the time.
No, me and him have got a really good relationship,
nice.
and I try and stay on the level with him. So when he talks like that, I just take the mickey out of him. But in general, all his friends do it, and it's really annoying. But
a lad in Lancashire, I wonder what the cultural influences are, because that's essentially the London twang, the London affectations. That would probably be multicultural London English, I think, the in it and the fam and the calm. But I don't know. I love it. Thank you, Raj. It's a beautiful, beautiful accent. 28 after 12 is the time. John's in Dulwich. John, what would you like to say?
Well, actually, mine's the other way round. So basically, my daughters are ashamed of how I talk.
Well, that serves you right for moving to Dulwich, doesn't it, mate?
Well, I think I might be the exception to the rule in this area. But I get, and my wife as well. She's a speech therapist, and so she says to me, "You just can't pronounce things properly." So instead of saying house, I go house.
House.
So.
That's old school Cockney, though.
Music.
That's old school Cockney, I think, really.
Yeah, I think I must have got it from my dad. But, I mean, the biggest one, one of the things that also, instead of saying collateral, I'll say collateral. And people would go, what?
Don't know what you're talking collateral.
What collateral? What are you talking about? And then the one I've been having recently, which has set a bit of a debate on, is I call it Greenwich. Everyone else calls it Greenwich.
Greenwich. So I think you're estuary. I think you're like Adele. What do you spread on your toast?
Butter.
Oh, no, there it is, butter.
Well, see, you kind of caught me out a little bit there.
Code switching. It's called code switching when you move your accent according to who you're talking to. I just wanted to get that out there.
Right, well, I think that's what it is. So obviously, I'm putting on a posh accent because I'm speaking to you now, James.
That's exactly what I expect. But what are your daughters objecting to? Are they kind of a bit hyacinth bucket on this one, or?
No, they're not. They just speak reasonably well. I think that's obviously my wife.
Yes.
She just. I suppose they. I've just done it again, haven't I? I said suppose.
Suppose.
I think it's. I don't know. She seems to speak, not posh, but just nice.
Yeah.
And then there's me with my sort of. Well,
there's nothing wrong with your accent. I like it. It's got a bit of. It'd be a shame if we all spoke the same. That might be the subtext of this research: is that we're sort of conglomerating on similar modes of speech, whereas in fact the differences and the diversity is what gives spoken word its richness. The problem is the judgments that John refers to sometimes. People will think, oh dear, no, he can't be very trustworthy or very bright or very... which is just stupid, absolutely daft, but that's how it works. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headline. 12:34 is the time. Some lovely stuff coming in. This is nice from Louise. During lockdown, both my children, aged 2 and 7 at the time, lost their Surrey southern accents and completely took on my Manchester accent. When they returned to school within a short time, they changed again and went back to their southern accents. We're looking at the decline of the King's English and the old Cockney and its replacement with standard southern British, estuary and multicultural London English. I wonder which one of those categories young Henry Riley fits into. I shall let you decide when he brings us up to speed with Keir Starmer's speech earlier this morning. Henry, remind us why he had to make this speech.
I've got to try not to put on a voice now, James. A very good afternoon
hello,
to you.
Henry.
I know, I'm not doing that. Well, he had to make this speech. There's been a fair bit of disquiet in his party, it has to be said. In particular, the Labour Muslim Network have, really had a sort of large contingent of their members. Now, that includes not just party members, but also councillors. There's also rumours of some disquiet among MPs regarding the stance of the Labour leader on this. Of course, yesterday, we saw Andy McDonald, who very briefly was actually one of Sir Keir Starmer's shadow front benchers, suspended from the party because of his words at a pro-Palestinian protest on Saturday, I should say. And so, look, the Labour leader has sought to clarify his position today. He spoke for around 20 minutes or so at Chatham House in central London. There was a large chance for audience questions as well. Now, he said regarding this war, the consequences of it will last for decades. There needs to be a solution. He then said people will turn to him for answers. He said categorically he wants a two-state solution. He said in the past, people, in particular politicians, have put the conflict in the too difficult box and just paid lip service to it.
In the short term, on the humanitarian conditions in Gaza and the efforts by Israel to rescue her hostages. But in the future, also to the hope that I know still burns brightly for those who want peace. The two-state solution, an Israel where every citizen enjoys the security they need, and a viable Palestinian state where the Palestinian people and their children enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that we all take for granted.
He did admit that the two-state solution wasn't very simple. He said, for example, it's been clouded by the fog of war, by a cloud of misinformation as well, but we have to prevail. He also, crucially, James, rejected calls for a ceasefire.
While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now, for two reasons. One, because a ceasefire always freezes any conflict in the state where it currently lies. And as we speak, that would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October the 7th. Attacks that are still ongoing. Hostages who should be released, still held. Hamas would be emboldened and start preparing for future violence immediately. And it is this context which explains my second reason, which is that our current calls for pauses in the fighting for clear and specific humanitarian purposes, and which must start immediately, is right in practice as well as principle. In fact, it is, at this moment, the only credible approach that has any chance of achieving what we all want to see in Gaza, the urgent alleviation of Palestinian suffering.
So calls for small, short pauses, but no ceasefire. Elsewhere, James, he said Israel needs to operate within international law. The right to self-defense is fundamental, but it is not a blank check. He also added that Hamas was the enemy of the people, not Gaza. Israel's current siege conditions as well, James, he described as unacceptable. And then two other quick things as well. He did sort of hint that he may have spoken with Sir Tony Blair about the conflict. He did cite the peace that we saw in the 1990s. He was then asked if he had spoken with him. He said he wasn't necessarily taking advice, but he uses all the options available to him. And then I have to say, he's just left in his car, James, around 20 or so minutes ago. And it was a pretty worrying scene, actually. There was, around 50 protesters, I'd speculate, with Palestinian flags. And a few of them started running towards his car as he was leaving, banging on the window and getting very close to him. Of the two exits, both of them were pretty much surrounded. He did get in his car. No one got near him in the end, but still pretty intimidating.
Indeed. Just to clarify, I know you said this, but he has, because it was during his interview here, wasn't it, that the international law question became thorny. So he has issued a clear commitment to international law, insisting that Israel abide by international law.
Absolutely. And he said the current siege conditions unequivocally were unacceptable and said that, he did specifically cite, water, electricity. He said they cannot be cut off and they would be a breach of international law.
It's quite odd for a politician, this, in the current climate, isn't it? To really come out and try to undo damage. And interesting that you mentioned how open he was to questions. Now, there are some people that he will never satisfy with this. But for people who are satisfiable, do you think it was a compelling speech?
Well, I think, as you say, James, there are certain sorts of caucuses on both sides, not to necessarily be disobliging at all, but they're just very firm in their positions. And so I think anything Sir Keir Starmer could have said wouldn't have satisfied them. I spoke with two very prominent Labour Muslim members straight after the speech who told me that they welcome some of the warm rhetoric, but actually, in terms of what they say, nothing has changed. And, they told me they still expect many more members, many more councillors to resign.
So anything short of a ceasefire will not be satisfactory. I wonder how that plays out in coming days. He's moved, but not far enough. Saida Arsi, who of course was a deputy chair of the Tory party, has provided a neat analysis as well. She picks up on the positives first. The language was more balanced. There's a clear commitment now to international law, a clear commitment to international accountability, and the reassertion of support for a two-state solution alongside condemnation of settlement expansion. It's a story that's being overlooked a little bit in some of the coverage, and a warning on displacement. However, she is she's of the view that his failure to commit to or to call for a ceasefire will be seen as a huge mistake as we start to see the detail of the sheer scale of destruction and loss of life in Gaza. And she picks upon or accuses him of failing to understand the full breadth of Jewish/Israeli/ hostage-based opinion. We shall see. 12:42 is the time. Back to the altogether lighter territory of accents and the question of whether you hate your child's. No one's quite gone in yet. And I mean, Raj kind of did, but he didn't really hate it. I guess we're probably more comfortable criticising our elders than we are our youngers. It's a sort of protective impulse, perhaps. Emma's in Wetherby in West Yorkshire. Emma, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Well, so I'm from North Kent originally,
right.
And we moved up here about 10 years ago, and I've got 3 children. My youngest was only a year old when we moved up here, but the other 2 had fully fledged North Kent accents.
Right.
My eldest now sounds like, I'm very careful how to say the words, but he sounds like he's been born and bred in Bradford most of the time, depending on who he's with. But his accent, his West Yorkshire accent that he's picked up is really strong. My daughter, she speaks far more in terms of, not the Queen's English, but she gets called posh often.
Right.
And then my youngest is still very much Yorkshire, but a bit more subtle. So, but the bus is there, and the path, and the bath. That kind of thing, but it's a real menagerie of different accents. My husband,
Why is
from
that?
North Yorkshire.
Oh, is he?
He does have a slight Yorkshire accent, but it's softer being from North Yorkshire apparently. But he's in his industry, he's referred to as the Cockney because he spent 20 years down south.
So it's nuances, isn't it? It's like different points on a dial in your family. Why do you think your daughter has? I mean, what are the influences? So your lad is probably just trying to fit in with everyone at school.
Absolutely, isn't he? And when he's left school now, but when it didn't happen when he was still in primary school when we moved up, and his accent didn't really change. Then it was when he moved up to high school, and it was almost instantaneous. And he will say now he did it purely to fit in, and not stand out, so much. Whereas my daughter just seems to she's been determined to almost kind of retain her.
Oh, I love it. It's a question of so much. Yes, it's identity, isn't it, as well? It's a sense of who she is.
And she's been very keen. She still will say very much that she's from South London or from North Kent, and whereas my youngest, he's 11.
Do you have a favourite? Not a favourite child, a favourite accent?
North Kent accent every time.
So your girl is the apple of her mum's eye on this one.
Well, but she sounds different to me even.
Sure. I love it.
I mean, everyone's obviously got their telephone voice and everything, and I was brought up very much to make sure that you always say your T's and you always say your H's and all that kind of stuff. But if I'm very relaxed, that can drop. Whereas my daughter is very much,
yes, very on her toes.
It's a softer accent, I guess.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Thank you. I don't know why this is such a delightful conversation, but it really is. I haven't got very long for one of my old-time callers. Wayne in Basildon hasn't been on for a while, but I'll squeeze you in, mate, but I haven't got long.
Go on, I'll go as quick as I can.
What are you? What are you?
But there are no H or T's in this house.
Ass. So you're estuary, mate?
Yeah, no. Well, the thing is, Basildon is an overflow town.
Yes.
All right. So most of the people that live in Basildon are old school East End. They're from.
Well,
they're
their
from
parents
Glasgow.
were. Their parents were old school East End.
So
or their
you've got
grandparents.
that amalgamation of
Yeah, but this is, you're not Cockney. You're going to claim you're Cockney. You're not Cockney. You're Estuary.
I don't know.
Well, I'll read it to you. Spoken by a range of people from blue-collar workers to middle class, it is similar to Cockney, but softer. Around 26% of speakers surveyed spoke with the accent, which gets its name from extending out along the Thames estuary. It is prevalent in Essex, although it is spoken across the southeast.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll grant you that, but I'm telling you now, both our daughters, there's no H or T's at all, and like, even Florence is downstairs right now, and she just said to me, "Dad, can you help me with this puzzle?"
Bless her.
All right, she's free.
Yeah.
and the thing is, like when I pick them up, from
I thought the
school,
oldest was better spoken than that.
Yeah, well, no,
She sings beautifully. When she sings, she's got all her T's and consonants in place.
She goes more American.
That's it. Yeah.
I've caught her a few times, like pretending to do like YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And she puts on an American accent. And I'm like, why are you talking like that?
Bless her.
That's not your voice. And then as soon as she gets off, like she's messing around with like me spare phone.
Yeah.
She'll get off of that, and then she'll just be talking exactly like I am now. But I don't think the accent is going anywhere. I think it's just a case of, like, as I say, all the kids at our school all talk the same as us. We're all like products of our environment.
So there's no generation, but there wouldn't be generational change. You are the generational change. So what do you spread on your toast?
Butter.
What used to get delivered to your house every morning?
Milk.
In a what?
What do you mean in a what?
What was it in?
A milk phone.
No, what was the actual vessel it was in?
Bottle.
A what? A what?
A bottle.
A bottle? A milk bottle?
Yeah.
You are
hang on.
Hang on, no,
mate.
wait there. Play Adele. Play Adele. I'm comparing you to Adele. Listen to a bit of Adele.
I really, really want to come to Brazil. I know that everyone there knows that already. I just still haven't been able to get there, but
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, but she's from South London.
Well, yeah, but she's estuary, though.
How can you be estuary if you're South London?
Well, it's but you sound the same. That's the whole point. It's a different. The tribes are changing. Anyway, I've got to go. I've got an important bit.
Right.
I've got to do some journalism, Wayne.
Back on. I'll see you in a. When am I coming up?
Well, are you coming to the London gig?
Yeah.
I'll see you there.
All right.
You're on the list? All right, take it easy. I think we're probably done on accents. Apologies. I've got Rosemary and Roger waiting. One in Ottawa and... beg your pardon. One in Ontario and one in Bromsgrove. But I want to get stuck right into this COVID-19 evidence that Lee Kane, former Director of Communications, and Dominic Cummings, former Master of all he surveyed at Downing Street, have been sharing today. Natasha is here to talk us through it. Go on, then.
Hello, James. Thanks so much for having me. So, we've been hearing from two huge figures at the COVID inquiry today. Dominic Cummings has just started. He's been on for about 20 minutes, so we've not really got into his evidence yet. But what we have heard already, Cummings, who obviously famously drove to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight during lockdown, started off by defending a lot of expletive-filled WhatsApp messages he sent about senior members of the government.
Due in large part to your own WhatsApps, Mr. Cummings, we're going to have to coarsen our language somewhat. I apologise. You called ministers useless pigs, morons, in emails and WhatsApps to your professional colleagues.
I'm going to say it once more because it'll get boring otherwise. But it's the way they talk about each other is the way that we were talking about them. It's such a mystery to me that the massive bulk of the British media was still blowing smoke up their backsides while they were biting chunks out of each other. I won't interrupt you anymore, Natasha.
No, feel free. But yes, I think this really does sum up the best bit of Cummings so far. And he just sits there completely ashen-faced and completely, pale, ghostly and white on this Halloween Eve. As he's being told you are describing ministers at the height of lockdown and you're, essentially just... slacking them off live on your WhatsApps. And obviously all of these WhatsApps, some of them are not particularly new. We've heard a lot of them before, but we did get Dominic Cummings trying to defend them.
I was reflecting a widespread view amongst competent people at the centre of power at the time about the calibre of a lot of senior people who are dealing with this crisis extremely badly.
Slow down, please, Mr. Cummings. Are you suggesting that your views expressed in those revolting ways were shared by others?
Well, my appalling language is obviously my own, but my judgment of a lot of senior people was widespread.
Do you feel that you expressed your views too trenchantly, that your opinion of ministers and of the cabinet overstated the position?
No, I would say, if anything, it understated the position, as events showed in 2020.
Pretty spicy from Dominic Cummings there. So yes, we've had a morning of evidence. We started off with Lee Cain, the PM's former Downing Street Director of Communications. He's been talking about how there was a lack of diversity at the top of government, how there was chaos at the heart of Number 10. He even admitted that the PM was probably not the right leader for the pandemic. I think I can probably say that's a little bit of an understatement as well. He also admitted that Boris Johnson should have done more about coronavirus in early March 2020 when it first became clear that this was going to be such a huge issue.
I think the Prime Minister was not alone in not doing as much as we should by early March, given the scale and the evidence that was all over our TV screens at the time. So, yes, the Prime Minister should have done more, but I think also, the team around him and across Whitehall should have done more.
What about you? Did you think by early March it was a big deal or not?
I think we all thought it was a significant challenge and something that was going to be, the only thing that we were focusing on for an awful long time. I think it was more of, how and what should we be doing at that point. I don't think there was any clarity of purpose, any really serious outlined plan to deal with COVID at that particular point. And I think that was the core failure was, what were we supposed to do? I'm not an epidemiologist. That's not what the expertise I would bring. I think, there was a lack of clarity of what we should be doing at that point, really.
So there you have it. You have Lee Cain admitting we didn't have a plan at the start of March. And actually he did went on to go and say that actually got so bad at some points that he and other comms professionals, because there was nobody coordinating the response at the heart of government in Number 10 at the Department of Health, he really did throw the Department of Health under a bus there, saying that, I had to start writing the plan. I had to start coming up with these very
this is
detailed.
a man that was once employed by the Daily Mirror to follow a politician.
The Daily Mirror chicken.
Dressed as a chicken.
Yeah, and he was writing government policy at the heart of COVID.
Okay. Whose ears would have been burning the hottest? Matt Hancock?
Matt Hancock, definitely. And we haven't quite got into this from Dominic Cummings yet, but we all know his disdain that Dominic Cummings has for Matt Hancock, the former health secretary. And I think, yes, we did see a little bit from Lee Cain saying, actually, at the very start of the pandemic, we were told repeatedly by the Department of Health that everybody was very prepared for this COVID pandemic, that we had all the preparations in place. And that's what Number 10's argument is that the reason why Boris didn't focus on it, he was focusing too much on Brexit, they said. He was focusing too much on whether he wanted to have a reshuffle.
I can't stress this enough. These are his closest allies and colleagues who are saying this stuff.
And now they no longer are. They absolutely no longer are.
The circular firing squad is in full swing. What has shocked you most? to emerge so far in the last 2 days, really?
I think it was that message that Lee Kane just referenced just then in that clip, that he personally was at the heart of the government's number 10 comms operation, was running and writing government policy. Like, that is just not something that comms professionals should be doing.
His job is to communicate the
exactly,
policy.
and there was no plan at the very, very beginning. There was no plan, and also just we did know this already, but there was a lack of data coming into number 10 about what on earth their plan would mean. And it only emerged, Lee Kane was saying earlier today, that Dominic Cummings came up to him and said, the NHS is going to be completely overwhelmed and we're going to have hundreds of thousands of people dying if we don't change course. And they just didn't have the data to know what was going to happen if they continued down the course they were on.
Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. I sense we will be returning to this territory in coming days. Thank you. Meanwhile, that's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as staying up to date with all the latest news from LBC. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thank you.
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 Time for Sheila Fogarty.